whole trade war thing because things are getting intense. It's March 2025, and we've got reports from The Guardian and CBC News that are painting a pretty dramatic picture.
It really is captivating. We're not just talking about tariffs here, but we're actually witnessing a massive power play with potentially, long-lasting consequences on the world stage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The U.S., under President Trump, just dropped a bombshell, 25% tariffs on most goods coming in from Canada and Mexico, and they didn't stop there. They slapped another 20% on Chinese imports.
Yeah, to put that in perspective, we're talking about almost $1 trillion worth of imports being impacted by this. It's not just a nudge, it's a full-blown economic earthquake.
So what's the fallout from all of this? I'm guessing Canada and China aren't just going to sit there and take it.
You're absolutely right. They're not. This move by the U.S. has triggered a wave of retaliation, and it's all playing out in a very strategic way. Canada, for example, isn't holding back at all. Prime Minister Trudeau immediately countered with tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods.
Okay, so what's on Canada's hit list? Are they going after big industries, or are they trying to make a point with everyday items?
It's a calculated mix. They're targeting things like American beer, bourbon, and orange juice ciders that will directly hit U.S. consumers and put pressure on specific industries. But they're also being careful not to hurt Canadian businesses that rely on U.S. imports. It's a delicate balance.
It sounds like a high-stakes game of chess where every move has to be carefully considered.
Exactly. And Canada's making it clear that this is just the beginning. If the U.S. doesn't reconsider these tariffs, they're warning that there could be even more to come.
And what about China? What's their response to all of this?
China's response has been equally strategic. They're focusing on American agricultural products like soybeans, pork beef, and even various fruits and vegetables.
So they're hitting back at industries where the U.S. is particularly vulnerable.
Precisely. It's a calculated move to leverage their economic power and inflict pressure on those specific sectors, particularly American farmers who rely heavily on those exports.
Okay, so things are definitely tense. But is this just a North American squabble? Or is the rest of the world getting nervous about all of this?
This situation is sending shockwaves across the globe. Asian markets, for instance, are reacting with significant drops as investors grapple with the uncertainty. This just highlights how interconnected our global economy really is. When giants like the U.S. and China engage in a trade war, the tremors are felt far and wide.
It's like watching a domino effect in slow motion, but with potentially disastrous consequences.
No, the potential for collateral damage is huge, and that's why we're starting to hear voices of caution emerging from all corners of the world.
Like who? Give me some names. I want to know who's waving the red flag here.
Well, we've got economists warning about the very real possibility of a global recession. Some experts are predicting price hikes on everyday goods, which will put a further strain on household budgets. And then you have figures like the Bank of Canada governor expressing deep concern about the long-term impact of these tariffs.
What are they saying specifically? Paint the picture for us.
The Bank of Canada governor has suggested that there might not be a quick bounce back this time around. He's hinting at potential structural changes to the economy, not just a temporary dip. Then there's Warren Buffett, who didn't mince words when he called these tariffs an act of war.
Wow, an act of war? That's some pretty strong language.
He's also called it a tax on goods that will ultimately be paid by American consumers. And coming from one of the most respected voices in finance, those words carry a lot of weight.
So it's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. There are real-world consequences for people's lives and livelihoods.
Right.
This is getting heavy.
It absolutely is. And the big question looming over all of this is...
Yeah.
What happens next?
Right, because it feels like this trade war is just getting started.
Yeah.
And with all this retaliation and economic uncertainty swirling around, who knows what's coming next?
That's the million-dollar question. Will this escalate further, dragging other countries into the fray? Will there be any attempts at negotiation or a peaceful resolution? Right now, all eyes are on the White House and global markets as we wait for the next move.
You know what's fascinating is this isn't just about economics and trade figures.
Totally. You can practically feel the tension rising between these countries. It's palpable.
Yeah, the sources we have don't dive deep into the political motivations. But, it's pretty clear this trade war is pouring gasoline on an already smoldering fire. It's a real shift away from, global cooperation and towards an every nation for itself kind of mentality.
Yeah, it's like everyone suddenly forgot how to talk things out and they just started throwing tariffs at each other instead.
And that kind of language can really do serious damage in the long run. It erodes trust, which is essential for global stability. And it makes it way harder to tackle those big, messy problems that we all face together. Okay, so we've got these tariffs flying back and forth. The markets are having a mini meltdown and the experts are starting to sound the alarm. But what does this actually mean for everyday people? How does this trade war impact someone listening to this right now?
That's the question that everyone should be asking. And it's a tough one because the impact is going to vary a lot depending on your situation. But there are a few key areas everyone should be thinking about.
All right, hit me with them.
Well, first up, consumer prices. Those tariffs on goods from Canada and China, they're going to translate into higher prices for a lot of the stuff you buy regularly. So think groceries, electronics, clothes, even big ticket items like cars and building materials could get hit. So yeah, your wallet might be feeling a little lighter in the coming months.
Ouch. So it's not just some abstract economic concept. It's going to hit people right in their bank accounts.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the reality. And then there's the impact on jobs. If Canadian and Chinese businesses start losing sales because of these tariffs, they're going to have to make some tough decisions, cut back on production, maybe even lay off workers.
Right. And then that ripple effect spreads even further because if American businesses can't compete because of all these tariffs, they might be in the same boat too.
Exactly. So you've got this potential for job losses on both sides of the border. It's this nasty feedback loop that hurts everyone involved.
Okay, so rising prices, job insecurity, what else should people be bracing themselves for?
Well, the big one is the overall health of the economy. Trade wars tend to put the brakes on economic growth. Businesses get nervous about investing, consumers start tightening their belts, and it can create this downward spiral. We're already seeing hints of this in those shaky stock markets.
That's best case scenario, things are going to be bumpy for a while. Worst case scenario, we're headed for a global recession.
It's definitely a possibility, but it's important to remember that things are still very much in flux. There's always a chance for negotiations, de-escalation, or even a complete U-turn on these policies.
Okay, fingers crossed for some sanity to prevail. But in the meantime, what can people actually DO about all of this? It can feel pretty overwhelming, you know?
It's a natural reaction. It's easy to feel powerless when you're talking about global economics and political maneuvering. But even in the face of all this, there are things individuals can do to navigate these choppy waters.
Right, I'm all ears. Give us some actionable advice, because I think we could all use a little empowerment right now.
First and foremost, stay informed. Keep tabs on the news, follow reputable sources, and try to understand the complexities of this trade war and its potential impacts. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions.
Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. Second, think about your spending habits. You might want to be a bit more mindful of your budget in the coming months, especially with those price increases on the horizon. Maybe explore alternative options or brands that might be less affected by the tariffs.
So basically, shop smart, be prepared, and don't panic.
Exactly. And speaking of not panicking, that's my third piece of advice. It's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom headlines, but try to stay level-headed and focus on what you can control. Make smart decisions, stay flexible, and remember that even in challenging times, there are always opportunities for resilience and innovation.
Okay, I like that. Don't panic, stay informed, shop smart, and be adaptable. Solid advice. But all this talk about tariffs and trade wars, can we make this a little more concrete? Like, give me a real-world example of how this could play out in someone's life.
Sure, let's take someone who works for a Canadian lumber company that exports a lot of its wood to the U.S. With these new tariffs, the cost of that lumber just went up for American buyers.
Okay, see where you're going with this.
So those American buyers might start looking for cheaper wood, maybe from suppliers within the U.S. or from other countries that aren't subject to these tariffs.
And that means less business for the Canadian lumber company.
Right. And what happens then? Well, that company might have to scale back its production, maybe even lay off workers or cut back on hours.
And suddenly, that abstract trade war has a very real impact on someone's paycheck and ability to provide for their family.
Exactly. And that's just one example. You can apply the same logic to a Chinese farmer whose livelihood depends on exporting soybeans to the U.S., or an American factory worker who relies on affordable parts imported from Mexico. These tariffs have the potential to set off a chain reaction that impacts countless lives in ways both big and small.
Well, okay. That really brings it home.
And that's precisely why it's so important to pay attention to these developments and understand what's at stake. Trade wars might seem like something happening on a global stage far removed from our daily lives. But the truth is, their impact is felt locally in the lives of everyday people.
Got it. No more ignoring the headlines. This stuff matters.
It absolutely does. And on that note...
Okay, so we've covered like the tariffs, the
Right.
retaliation, the potential economic fallout.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in, but you know what? If we step back for just a minute and look at the bigger picture here, what does this whole like trade war saga tell us about where the world is headed?
That's a really insightful question. I think what we're seeing is like a really seismic shift in, global power dynamics. Countries are becoming more assertive, in pursuing their own interests, even if it means, shaking up the existing order.
It's like everyone's playing this really high-stakes game with the global economy, and no one wants to fold first.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And it's not just limited to the U.S. either. We're seeing this trend towards, nationalism and protectionism popping up all over the world.
So is this the end of globalization as we know it? Is it every country for themselves now?
It's not quite that simple. Globalization is really complex, and it's woven into the fabric of our world. It's not going to, vanish overnight, but it's definitely going through like a really turbulent transformation as countries try to figure out this, interconnected world and how to best position themselves within it.
So maybe it's less about the death of globalization and more about like a renegotiation of the terms.
Exactly. We're seeing a push for, fairer trade deals, more regional alliances, and like a renewed focus on domestic industries and jobs. The old rules are being challenged, and the jury's still out on what the new playbook will look like.
It's exciting and a little bit scary all at the same time, right? Change can be a good thing, but it can also be messy and unpredictable.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so crucial to stay engaged, stay informed, and be a part of shaping the future we want.
Okay, so on that note, let's wrap things up. What's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with from this deep dive into the trade war?
I think the biggest takeaway is this: we're all interconnected, and our actions have consequences. Whether it's a tariff imposed by a government or a decision made by a CEO, or even, our own everyday choices as consumers, our actions create ripple effects that extend, far beyond ourselves. So it's more important than ever to be mindful of those choices and work towards a more just and sustainable world.
Well said. And on that thought-provoking note, we'll leave you to ponder the implications of this trade war and what it means for you, your community, and the world at large. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay tuned as we continue to explore this unfolding story.